Hello and welcome to another episode of Voices to Hear. I'm Ece and I'm here today with these amazing two people. They're here to represent their civil society organizations that are actively working in Skopje, namely EKVALIS, and we have Stella Network. So Elena is from EKVALIS and is here to represent EKVALIS, and Sara is here to represent Stella Network. So can you maybe begin with introducing yourselves more?
Okay, I will start. Hi, I'm Elena from EKVALIS. I'm one of the 4 permanent staff that we have at the moment there. We work on several topics that intertwine with each other, and one of those topics is the gender equality. Then we also work on LGBT issues, and we work on media literacy, and we also tend to work on empowering young people to become more active citizens, and we empower youth activism, that's what we call it. I am also a youth worker, so anything that we do, I try to bring it to a youth level and to focus on the youth aspects of the issues that we work on.
And my name is Sara Milenkovska. I'm one of the co-founders of Stella Network, and also I work as a program manager with my team. So the main goal why Stella Network has started is to offer support, especially to women and girls in their academic and professional development. But from that one original thought, we also, as we grew as an organization, we focused on the intersectional aspect of our work, because all of us are coming from different backgrounds with the co-founders, but also within the mentorship network. Mm-hmm. We make sure that our work represents, our values as well, coming from the aspect of working together, creating collective spaces of solidarity and safe spaces for expression. One of the key things that we focus as an organization is, aside from the mentorship network that has over 200 mentors, is advocacy through policy briefs, through research, because we believe that aside from our activism, we also need to support the path towards gender equality with data. And that's something that kind of showcases our work as an organization. Recently, we also worked a bit more deeply with the digital gender-based violence aspect, because we realize you cannot empower, people without mentioning the threats that come in the digital spaces around us. And also, I personally work as a researcher, because first it's something that I'm really passionate about, but also I try to find ways how the scholarship that I create comes from the praxis of feminist collective care processes.
Okay, thank you. That was my first question, to get to know about your organization, its aims, because we need that kind of a solidarity environment in most of the big cities. So do you see somehow the effect or the difference that you are making in the Macedonian society? You have these activities, you have events, but can you really see the impact that you are doing? Do you think that you can reach the society?
It's when you ask us this question, for us, since we are very deeply inside of this process of trying to make a change, it's really difficult for us sometimes to see the change, because the change is not happening overnight. It takes time. And when you are working on the change, you cannot see it happening because you are within this process. Yes. So it's really difficult to step back and look the bigger image. But the change is here. I always take this example. It's not really related to gender equality issues that directly, but when it comes to change, I like to share this example, and I will share it with you now. I grew up in this small town, Negotino, and this town had very negative image towards people with disabilities. It was that negative that on the street where I grew up, there was a man who had cerebral palsy, and he was the only one we knew about, because he was the only one whose family was not afraid to take him outside and let him sit in the yard and enjoy the sun and the trees and the birds and everything. So when we were walking on the street, our families were always telling us, us not to look him in the eyes because we would get infected in a way or whatever. And I remember being a very little child, not knowing what this is, but being super scared of this man because I might get infected in some way, God knows what way. And after a few years, I was still very young. I was in middle school. On my very same street where this man lived, a daily center for people with disabilities was open. And I remember how disturbed the whole neighborhood was. They were like sharing different stories, they had so bizarre ideas of what will happen with our street now just because these people are coming to spend a few hours a day on our street. And then after a while, it took like 3 or 4 years with a lot of work from the daily center and a lot of everyday contact between the local people who lived on this street and the beneficiaries of this youth center who were people with very visible intellectual, mostly disabilities. It took some years, but then I was out of my town for some time and I was already an adult. And once I was back there and I realized this negative, very negative image for that specific group does not exist anymore, or it's different. Let's say it's not, I cannot say it's perfect, but people are not afraid. People don't tell their children not to look these people in the eye anymore because they will get the same, like they called it infection. I remember this very, very well. Like the issue is much more progressed, and the conditions, the societal conditions in which these people live in my town now are so much different. But yes, it did took some 10, 15 years to see the change. And then like whenever I talked with the people who worked through this daily center, they always were not very able to see the change because they were within this process of making the change. So it was really difficult to see the full image. But I was absent of my town for a while, and then I could actually see this change already happened. And it was really fascinating and a very good lesson and a very good reminder for myself as an activist to always remember that you might not always be able to see the change because you are the change. You're making this change happen. Mm-hmm. But if you just allow yourself to step back a bit and see the whole image, it's there. And that's why I believe that the change is happening, and I believe that in 20 years from now, I will look back and I will realize maybe that from the outside, we made it. Yes.
You said, I think it's impossible to see the change happening while you are a part of it. But with maybe like with the collective action, and if you have like some measurement, like if you have data in our hands, do you see like maybe you can answer that?
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how do we also define change. And I completely agree that you cannot see the exact impact of your work when you're so deeply involved, as Elena said. But also I think even one thing to add to that perspective is while you're struggling, while you're dealing with the challenges of sustainability, of activism, or even especially now with the anti-rights and the anti-gender movement. So when you're having these challenges on daily basis, it looks even worse than it actually is. Like there are real threats, but also especially because you're so deeply involved, you cannot see more the negative aspects of your work. And I think really the thing that was said about, taking the step back, but also see how you define change, I think really helps first with the sanity of all of our work, and also with the well-being, which I think is something that we cannot neglect, especially within our work, that what we actually do makes sense and it's important and should continue to be done. And I think the way that I, at least as part of Stella, what I try to see as a change more directly, it's not always, we will have like a successful mentorship. A girl will get accepted at the university she wanted to, or to a master's program, or to her PhD. But I see the change even more when people reach out to us who don't know what to do. So who are not, these kind of perfect students or whatever, who just want to, kind of continue building their career or whatever. It's more about reaching to the people that actually need a bit more deeper and intentional support. And I think seeing that we have become from the start where only people that knew exactly what they wanted in their life will reach out to us, that I see now a bit change in how people define mentorship and how people define this kind of processes of support that they see necessary in their own empowerment and even more in their own liberation from the gender stereotypes within our community. And that's the impact and the change that I have seen with our work, and I want to continue seeing. Some of the data kind of show there is like more women or girls in like more higher position and all that stuff, but I think that's I don't think that's a real representation of actual change in our society. And I think that's like a neoliberal perspective on how do we define improvement in gender equality, which I don't think that it goes in line with what liberation means. I also hope, as Elena, like in the future we will see these kind of forms of liberation, but I also see that we need to take kind of recognize the work that we're doing right now in aspect of changing some cultural norms, changing some behaviors. For example, it wasn't always the case that on the 8th of March you will have speeches on different languages in the beginning, and I think now with the work of different organizations, seeing that we work together more directly because gender equality affects us all, and also other forms of oppression that support the gender inequality. I think we kind of create, or we try to create a bit more a culture of collaboration rather than division, which has been presented as a norm in our society. The division based on, people with disabilities, people coming from different backgrounds, socioeconomic class, race, and gender, sexuality, like all the ways in which we find ways to divide each other. But I think our work kind of creates a bit more space to kind of bring, I wouldn't say new narratives, because I think we have a feminist history. We have, amazing stories from our past on which we can relate and say, things were changing because we're building on the work that somebody else did before us. I always say, like, maybe we start something new, like a new spark with our work, but we are able now to do that spark because somebody else before us did the effort. And, maybe older generation even think that now it's super much better than how it was back in the days, but we don't see it because we were brought up, in this generation. Yeah. But what I hope, and I try to do, even though I'm really pessimistic about a lot of things, I don't think that we have the privilege not to be hopeful. And I think that kind of hope adds more on how we define change and how do we see it in the everyday life in our work, but also how do we see it 20 years from now.
I would also like to add a thought that came to my mind now. Yes, change is here, and it will be visible when we allow ourselves to step back and see the full image. But that's definitely thanks to the very hard work of a lot of organizations, feminist organizations, equality organizations, and to the work of a lot of activists who operate individually but definitely collaborate strategically with different entities, including organizations. But in smaller places, in small towns, in rural areas, this change is not going so rapidly as it goes in Skopje. And I feel like this is an issue that we should think more about and we should be more concerned about, because I am not trying to say that the conditions for women or marginalized groups are not improved in the last decades in those small areas, but they are definitely improving with a much slower pace than they are improving in the capital city and in few bigger cities, but especially the capital city of Skopje.
And we've talked about like cooperation. How do you think think your organizations are cooperating? Like, what is the environment of cooperation looks like in here, and who do you cooperate with as an organization? For instance, like, do you have any organizations from Turkey, for instance, or do you cooperate more locally, nationally, or internationally?
I believe international cooperation is very important, but in practical sense, local or national cooperation is probably even more important when it comes to really wanting to make the change happen. We can inspire each other a lot, and we can give support to each other as activists and activist organizations internationally. But if we really want to make the change, we should unite and we should network exactly here within the borders of this country. And this includes collaborating not only with organizations who are operating on the region of the capital city, but also outside of this, especially with organizations and local activists from smaller areas. And EKVALIS is trying to do that. We especially collaborate with smaller activist groups and organizations in the east of the country, where we lately saw that the need of civic activism is very visible, because the east of the country generally economically not developing very well, because a lot of the people have already migrated to other countries or to the capital city. So it's less and less people left to live there. And this automatically brings the case where not only the economical development is slow, but also the social development, let's say. So yeah, we are trying to not only collaborate with organizations, but also with local groups of activists. And sometimes we will not fully agree in our values, but we are trying to find the common ground and collaborate on this common ground and grow together from that point. Everything that the feminist movement in this country has achieved is definitely thanks to the collaboration of different groups and strategical networking. We also have several formal networks through which we collaborate, and we are over 30 organizations and activist groups in these networks. And this is what makes the change happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add on that, in Stella we have, like I said, 200 mentors, which are already part from different networks in their own work, especially because not all of them, work in social science or are activists. You have women from completely different background that introduce their own perspective in the overall work that we're trying to do, especially in what empowerment means from different perspectives, and of course, like I said, in different sectors. Even though we started as an organization, Stella Network in Macedonia, most of our people kind of live abroad, and that's why we kind of operate a bit more on online and in digital sphere, because we find there are good ways in how people can contribute back to their own country while they're not living anymore in Macedonia. So that's like one aspect of the transnational solidarity that you have within the organization coming from people living abroad. And also a few of the co-founders one of them is living in Amsterdam, in London, in Vienna and in Graz, and one in Albania, in Tirana. So their own positionality from their own, background is also trying to contribute to Stella, not just directly as a co-founder or a mentor, but also in building this kind of feminist connections and networks beyond our country. One really important thing that goes in line with Elena said about the decentralization of, the issue is also learning from how other countries are dealing with gender equality and the attack on gender equality and human rights. So one of the key recommendations is like this coalition building, especially with even organizations that are coming from a different background, not just always with working directly with gender equality. So I think this kind of sharing of knowledge, open resources, ways in, that we share the practice of how we deal strategically with certain things is a form of kind of collaboration on regional level and on transnational level. well. And I think it goes also in line with the feminist values of, if I can help you not to go through the same thing that, I went through, it's already a form of sharing that knowledge and expertise, which I think is really important. National level, Stella and EKVALIS also is part of the platform for gender equality. So that's a way of, dealing with issues on gender equality from a collective, from this kind of like platforms that can collectively establish more, let's say, intentional approach on some of the things. But we should also move beyond the formal ideas of how we collaborate. And I think Stella as an organization wouldn't even existed if there weren't people that have supported us throughout the years, especially because we're a really small organization with a lot of limited resources, and the whole aspect of the mentorship being free and accessible, but also the mentors giving their own time and supporting strategically developing where we are, goes in line in how important collaboration is on all these levels that we are trying to do the work. And that goes in line also on local level. When you're trying to organize something, you cannot have this kind of approach. I'm going to come from Skopje and tell you about feminist issues. No, you work together. You work together with the community. You know your own feminist positionality with all of these processes, because there are a lot of power structures that already exist. Aside from our awareness about those power structures, we need to be careful in that kind of way. So on local level, I think the best way that we have approached things is by first working with the mentors that we have on local level, hearing them out, seeing, what's the best approach on things, and then working together with the community. In some areas, we had direct work with the municipality. There are people that can be open, and in some places, you actually are having events in secret because you want to make sure that is safe for the work that we're doing. Mm-hmm. So coalition building in general, I think it's a form of resistance, in sense also about how we create this kind of resistance aside from the usual suspects within our group, but also see that some of the organizations that work in, let's say, democratization processes, media and so on, they have a role within building better ways in how we address gender equality. And that's a big step, we don't always have the resources to do or the time or whatever, but just thinking about how that collaboration works, I think it kind of helps us also to see the bigger picture of what we're trying to do with the work that we're doing.
As two representatives of these two organizations, what would you recommend to people who want to be more active in civil society, who wants to be involved in your organizations, for instance? Because personally in Turkey, I had a hard time to find these people because I had to willingly and knowingly search for them. I had to always check their social media if they have events. What would you recommend for those people who want to be involved in your work?
I would recommend to the educational system to open up a little bit and finally understand how crucial it is to collaborate with us and to collaborate with the civil society, because otherwise we just cannot become extremely accessible for the young people, because the only place where young people are certainly is school. Mm-hmm. And everything out of school is already making it a bit more difficult to access young people and young people to access us. So I would start from there, that schools, the educational system has to be open for organizations that work on these issues so that young people can easily find us and reach and become part of these groups, organizations, or informal groups, and do something more for the society. I would encourage young people who are listening to this podcast to put effort and to search, because unfortunately that's probably the thing that they would have to do in order to find a group of activists in their local community, or an organization, or an individual activist even who is interested in certain issues that they are also interested in. As organizations, I think we both also try to not wait for the young people to come to us, but we go there in the local communities. And as I said, with EKVALIS, we are also working a lot in the east of the country. And that's how we are trying to reach, and also through social media, through our platform on Instagram. But definitely, if they want to know more, it's also a good way to reach one organization, even though this organization doesn't work on a topic that they are very passionate about. They can reach any youth worker, any person that works with young people, and ask for further directions. And I am 100% sure that any organization will offer these resources. If a young person comes to EKVALIS and asks for a group that works with environmental issues, I will gladly share all of the information of other NGOs that work with environmental issues, even though we don't work on these issues. So I think the NGOs are very open to share resources.
I agree with everything that was said, especially, follow digital space, social media, because we are sharing, ways in which you can contribute. And one thing really to kind of add is that mentorship can help you find the right people, especially, as, if you have somebody that you follow, that you're interested. I would suggest to young people to not be a stranger, not to be afraid to reach out to people, or like Elena said, to the organization. But I think even individually, I think that kind of creates this kind of like safe way of communicating, that people are willing to kind of help you and give you the resources, but also give you, the exact people that you might be looking for. And I know that we are a small community as well. So that's maybe a good advantage in the chaos of information. We are a smaller community rather than in Turkey. I think it might be more difficult to find, the exact specific organization that you would like to join. But I would also suggest to people to create. So if you don't see something that is, going in line with what you want to do, I think creating that community, creating that kind of like bringing people together, it's a really form of organizing that is important, much more than I would say anything else, because I think it brings the political aspect of the importance of bringing people together. So I would suggest people that want to be connected to find ways in which they can organize. And that goes with, trial and error. You sometimes fail, you sometimes succeed. But I would suggest people to kind of continue, be curious, to ask the questions, to go to events, to go to exhibitions, to make yourself, out there more directly with the themes that you are interested, because in those spaces you find the people step by step in what you're trying to do. Especially, I think, even for the work that we're doing, it goes in line with kind of, we tend to gather in the similar spaces. The point is, how do we create those spaces more directly? Follow our work, follow the people that you find interested, and don't be afraid to kind of reach out and ask for guidance and help, and even more importantly, for mentorship, in order for you to find the best ways in which you can become more engaged in your society.
I just have to agree with Sara about creating, because in small towns, I cannot stop thinking how obvious the lack of opportunities for young people in small towns and in rural areas is. Like, I grew up in a small town, and it's not even the worst place in this country. And I felt like there is nothing for me there. There was only one poetry club that existed for 7 months. And then this woman who led this club, she left the town, and that was it. And there was literally nothing except for the church and the political parties. So I had to find my ways to create my activities there. And
you had to open your own way too.
I had to, yes, but not everyone is courageous enough. So sometimes when you don't feel courageous enough to do these things, just ask for support and try to create a group of even 2 or 3 people who have the similar interests as you, and try to be brave and create these things, because someone will be thankful to you in your town, and you will be thankful to yourself after a few decades when you look back and see what you've done.
So now I have one question for EKVALIS. In your website, I obviously checked your website as well. And you have, as you mentioned, you have this...
Someone is checking our website. Yes.
Yeah. As it was mentioned there, you have, and you, as you mentioned here also, you have this specific strategic areas that you focus on, like namely youth activism, gender and LGBTQ plus equality, and media literacy. So why do EKVALIS focus on these specific 3 topics, and how do you think they correlate with each other?
Oh, they correlate a lot.
Yeah.
We determined these few areas as of our strategic areas of work when we were creating our previous strategy for the 5 years, which is about to be wrapped up very soon. So we will have to check if we still continue with the exact same topics or we see a need of something to be added. But at that time, this was the time before the pandemic. And already then there was a very obvious need to work on media literacy, and throughout the pandemic we saw this need even more. So it was definitely something that we wanted to focus on. And when it comes to media literacy, it very often intertwines with the issues like gender equality and the rights of LGBT people. And how and where do we see that? At this point of the time, it's mostly through the very harmful movement of what we call the anti-gender movement. There is this group that became much more active throughout the pandemic, I would say, and their movement is growing more and more, unfortunately, not as much as our movement. And they are constantly using fake news, and they are constantly using fear through some sort of illegitimate media channels. And it's really easy if you don't have the necessary media literacy, if you are not able to really fact check and see that this is not an accurate information, that this is fake news and it's disinformation. It's very easy to become a victim of manipulation of these groups that propagate against gender equality and against the rights of LGBT people, especially trans people. So yes, these strategic areas that we have shown that they definitely intertwine, and we are continuing to work intersectionally on these issues, because without media literacy, there is no ability among people to understand what's fake news. And a lot of the fake news come within the field of LGBT issues and gender equality in the last years, especially. This is very, very obvious and frightening. And then when it comes to youth activism, this also intertwines because with the rest of our strategic areas, because we want to have descendants. We cannot probably have the energy to be on the streets our whole life. There will be a point in which we will be exhausted, and maybe even like
now.
We need young people. We are already exhausted. No, we have a bit of energy left, but we need new people. We need new creative ideas, and we need new energy in the activism, in the fight for basic human rights. So that's why we have youth activism as a strategic area. And in this area, we work a lot with young people on giving them the skills that they can use when they organize themselves in collectives towards certain human rights of certain group.
Thank you so much for your answer. It's really impressive that these topics that you focus on are changing like periodically according to what society needs. And especially like with the pandemic, I think it was obvious that media literacy is like an important part of kind of creating a healthier society with like accurate information. And for Stella Network, I have also a question. I became familiar with Stella Network during the Women's March. You also like a part of one of the organizing parties of the march, right? What was the process of organizing it, and what do you think that can be improved in the future marches, or do you see any spaces for improvement?
the process of organizing the march is a collective process, especially the lead we would say is the platform of gender equality, which is 28 organizations. All of the organizations are active from a different perspective in how they're, their own expertise, their own ways of how they collaborate. I think the ways of improvement, and this is a good way to be self-reflective and seeing, how we should do things better, even though we are really drained and, we still have something left, but we are also aware about how exhausting the process is. I think that starting early and having a bigger, let's say, approach in how things are addressed within the processes of organizing marches, I think can improve the ways in which we communicate with the public. Because I think it's really important to understand that the 8th of March is not just, something that it's only organized by the platform of gender equality, but actually it's a march where everybody should feel and are included. It's marking an international fight, of course, from a local and national perspective. So I think that's maybe an aspect that we need to say in the way that we address the things, especially the language that we speak. Because like Elena said, on the local level, there is, we can have these academic discussions about what is feminism, but we also need to understand that we should not further demystify the battle for gender equality. So making things more accessible, making things more approachable, it's one of the ways that I think the march can do better and should organize, in a way that kind of resonates with the people that we are addressing. Because I truly believe that, I speak on my own experiences, both as a survivor, both as a person that directly, studied gender and all that stuff. But those are my experiences, and I can only, share those experiences within the framework of what we're doing. But the point is how everybody with their own experiences can contribute with the different perspectives that should be included in something that we call the International Women's Day, or the International Day for fighting against, the patriarchy. So I think that's one aspect of how things can be done better, making it more accessible, finding ways in how we collectively join and voice our concerns and opinions, especially because I think now with the rise of the anti-gender and anti-rights movements, I think we don't have the privilege again once not to be joined around the issues that we are being attacked. So this is a way that we need to show our maturity, that we, have a firm ground on which we're standing in sense of dealing with these issues, especially in the ways that they are more organized, they're better funded. And sorry for using like us and they and, that kind of approach and narrative. I want to move beyond that binary. But unfortunately, we are being portrayed in our country as, spies of the Western values and all that stuff, which is so ironic because the anti-gender movements are funded both from the West and from the East. We should use the march in general, but also this should be reflected within our work as a way of creating better collective work, better collective care processes, but even much importantly, community. I think that the reason why the anti-gender movements is being so successful is because the political parties, or whatever you call them, have capitalized on the fact that people don't feel united about certain things. This is a moment where we need to be more united. We need to be united, that's that. And we need to find ways in how the middle ground, or the people that are not directly, involved in our activities, are actually becoming more aware of why this is becoming more important. Next year, when we will have the 8th of March, we will be dealing with much more bigger issues. Things will change. I'm sorry, I'm a bit, not so optimistic about the future, but I also want to be aware that we need to, do the work. We will not have, I would say again, the privilege not to do it right, especially because I think it's going to become even more hostile, especially on local level, about the activists that are working for gender equality. And we're not talking about, people are attacked, with disinformation on social media. We're talking about physical safety and security, which you can see by all the reports, by EU reports that are confirming that the anti-gender movements are a point of destabilization of a country. But I see see it more of an example of how things could have been done better, what we should do better, in order for us to kind of prepare better and doing the work more collectively. And I completely, say that we are drained about certain things, but also there are things we need to do the work regardless of how things are.
I feel like we should explain what anti-gender movement means because it's still a very new term and it's mostly used academically. And I feel like a lot of people still don't know, but they definitely know these groups because they are very visible and they are everywhere. So I will try to explain it in a very simple way. The anti-gender movement is a group of activists and organizations that fight against what they call the gender ideology. And what they call gender ideology is our work, basically. They are trying to portray our fight for the basic human rights of lesbians, gays, trans people, and women, finally. They try to portray our fight as propaganda for something that's not natural, something that's imported from abroad. Usually they say it's imported from the West and so on. The funny thing is that they are financed by the West and by the East, as Sara said. And these groups, they became in Macedonia, they became very popular, especially during the pandemic, because they were promoting the idea that the pandemic, the virus isn't real, and this thing with obligatory wearing of masks is actually some way to control people. And then slowly, after the pandemic was fading away, they started to focus more and more on the issues that we work on. And like we are fighting for the basic human rights of few specific marginalized groups, and they call this the gender movement for some reason. And that's how academically they are named as the anti-gender movement.
But I also feel like these groups blame the human rights activists for being this like Western dominated ideas, but actually their ideology, like anti-gender movement is also can be a Western thing, because like in the United States,
US, the UK is also, especially the academia in the UK, is one of the main source that they use to kind of support their arguments.
These groups are usually using the narrative of children and saving children as their biggest asset, like strongest asset. Yeah. They usually say, save our children from pedophilia, from those Western values, save our families, and so on. So this is one way how you can recognize them and be careful when you see a content that comes from them.
Then this podcast can be a call for the young people to like actually like search for it and go in depth about what they are supporting and what they should support. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this month's podcast. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and I hope people who are going to listen to us will also enjoy and can become more informed. I want to end the episode wishing more space to enlarge our solidarity. So thank you.
Voices to hear.